either behind the scenes or, well, up front and center, such as Mark and myself. So with that, of course, I want to welcome Mark to another episode of the Citizens Reporter.
Thank you for having me again.
And truly, you know, we always kind of plan ahead during the week what kinds of topics we'd like to talk about. And Mark, of course, has a number of very different types of things that he's very interested in. I appreciate that because it makes our show a little more lively, and it also keeps me on my toes, which is always an excellent thing to keep the, the editor on her toes.
It also reaches to the whole nation, as it were, in many cases.
That's right. Now, a couple of things that we're going to be talking about today is that we're going to be talking about some of the issues having to do with the funding of the war in Afghanistan that Mr. Bradley has done some research on. We have a little film footage also from before the elections, and of course to talk about really, you know, what's been going on since the elections. And then we have some commentary to make with regard to how people who have a title or a position, how they are treated perhaps differently under the law in some cases. And then we're going to then follow up and wrap up a program talking a little bit about the last Citizens Forum that was held in the city of Maplewood, and we've got some film footage from that because we've covered it a little bit on and off with some of our editions of the Citizens Reporter, but we of course haven't finished all the film footage or talked about all the issues that were covered at that. So that's pretty much our three topics that we're going to be covering in this week's edition. So with that, Mark, why don't I give it over to you, and why don't you kind of set this up for our viewers as to, well, first of all, why it was that you decided to start looking at the amount of money that's being spent on our war efforts.
Well, as far as it goes, you have to understand that anything we do as far as defense goes also affects what we can do as far as commerce goes. So we have to be cognizant of that when we are preparing for something, that there is a cost expense value that's integrated into any type of decision we make. And basically we've let the industry go rampantly wild over the years. In fact, right from George Washington on down, Andrew Jackson had mentioned it. Teddy Roosevelt had also mentioned watching the purse strings that went to the military. Well, at those points, they were very, very much controlling, and even up to such great people as Truman, and then followed by Eisenhower, who made it a very big point in his statement to watch the military machine. We have let them go since then. Mm-hmm. Now, it's frightening to really to think how much we're spending, and we don't know this.
Right, and see, one of the things that I see is that, you know, jobs is truly, I think, one of the biggest challenges we have facing our country right now, because, you know, as much as maybe the mainstream media wants to have us believe that we're not in a recession, or that the pundits might want us to think that we're not in a recession, you know, I work in the trenches every day. You're just a regular fellow just like me. We know we're in a recession. It feels like a recession. It looks like a recession. It must be. And so one of the things that you're making the point is that there's only so much money to go around. Congress only has so much that they can fund and that they can appropriate for. And if you misalign your priorities and you're spending so much towards war efforts, how can you really truly do any jumpstart to the economy, to stimulate commerce, to have jobs, to do the things we need to do here at home?
And it also takes into the issue of who is our enemy, because the point is you cannot have a military constantly continually building for a supposed phantom enemy, because you've got to understand right now, as we've redefined the world, Russia is not in a position to be our enemy as it used to be. We actually won, and we won it back almost 20 years ago, and yet we find ourselves putting in an extra 1% per year into military spending, and we're talking about these special funds that we want to control that Congress is putting in. Well, the biggest one we're not controlling is the military because we don't know where that money is going. In fact, in Minnesota right now, and this is as current as today, we have been notified that one of our major industries is leaving the state because they found that they can work out of the state. But yet we had control of the Arms Commission. We also, our representatives and our senators are there that should have been speaking up to keep this here. But the other side of that coin is that I heard that the relative, and this is my understanding of it, because I haven't been able to document that, but they said that for this group, which is Lockheed, I believe Lockheed Marriott, they were making, for the actual people in the offices who were doing the work, over $35 an hour. And when you start to take a look at what everybody else is earning, that is outrageously large amount of money for an industry that has no major enemy to compete against at this point.
Well, and this really can be very certainly disconcerting for our state here of Minnesota, that if we're losing a major employer, every time that our state loses a major employer, that of course is part of that base from which our state collects revenues having to do with income taxes and other kinds of revenues associated with that. And that just means then our state financial situation becomes more dire. And that's part of the reason why we're in such a deficit that we are in right now in budget issues, is because of the unemployment rate that we're experiencing. There just isn't the revenue that the state would normally need to be able to operate. And just losing another employer, having another one shut down or move out of state is just, it's just another nail in the coffin, so to speak. And I hate to sound so dire about that, but your point about, well, what did our Congress people do, or to try, or senators to try to encourage them to stay in their own state and to stay here? I mean, that's a question. Or what did the people at the state level do to try to keep them here?
Exactly. And more importantly, we also have to ask, where is this money going? Because we're not really have any knowledge of it. And usually we hear that it's going towards the men, towards the military. And that would be wonderful, except for I have from different charts, because of it's very hard to get the correct information from the federal government. They're so obfuscating on information, it's very hard to understand.
Right, and it's, that there's across so many sectors that the money may be allocated to try to figure out how to properly measure, or to that have different sources have different information. And I think it's really great though that you've checked a couple of different sources here,
right,
so we can kind of ballpark it exactly, that some might say it's this percent and some this percent, but it's got to be somewhere in that range. At least you can look at it that way.
And on top of that, when you start taking a look at the two different groups that I was able to take it, they actually concurred with each other. They changed the numbers, and very marginally, and that was because of one took the consideration of your inactive military that is on that's veterans who need physical work. And we only spend 4% on that.
Right.
4% of this enormous amount of money that we are right now looking at and questioning.
Right, and I don't think either you or I think that there's, we're not finding fault with taking care of our veterans and providing them the services that they need, because obviously they have indeed made many sacrifices for being in the service and serving their country and those kinds of things. But I think a large focus is looking at the continued aggression and military aggression that is ongoing right now in the active wars that we are engaging in, that we were promised that the troop withdrawal was going to be in 2011. And now, of course, we find out, oh, whoops, now that the election's over with, whoops, it's going to be 2014.
Well, it's also looking at trade partners that we have and obligations that we keep claiming we have to do for our trade partners, but they're not doing for us. A simple thing to understand, I think, for people is to understand that when we're talking about Europe, they spend about 26% of their income towards their military protection, and they're actually one of the larger ones compared to Asia, which is one of our trade partners there, which is China. Now, China, up until a certain president came into office, was really a trade enemy and was also an enemy of the state. And then you could see building up the military armaments, but now they're an ally. So why are we building up military armaments because we're not going to take out China, we're not going to take out Russia. Oh, that's right, we need rockets to take out Burma, or is it Pakistan, or are we talking Afghanistan?
Korea,
yeah. Of course, Korea is actually an ally of China, even though that China does seem to have the attitude that they have no responsibility. They saved Korea from actually becoming one country when the South actually beat the Korean North. And that one's, most historians will tell you that. So either they're lying, our historians are, or China's lying now. Now, I don't know which one's lying, but I'd like to get a Pinocchio measurement on this.
Hey,
Stick out your noses.
Hey, now that's a really, we could use that as maybe one of the corners, one of those feature corners, the Pinocchio corner.
Right.
Who's in Pinocchio's corner today?
Exactly.
And then we could highlight them. We'll have to put some thought into that and see who might want to stand in Pinocchio's corner each show.
Right.
Now that's an interesting idea. Now maybe before we go into the numbers, let's show a little of our film footage. Now this is, keep in mind, from the end of July. I think it was like around July 28th or so of this year, 2010. And keep in mind, this is before the big primaries were going to be going on, that many Congress people in various states were concerned about their primaries. And so this was sort of the position that a lot of them were trying to hoover into a corner, trying to make it sound like they really weren't all that supportive of continuing the appropriations for the war funding. And so this will kind of give you sort of a feel for what the positioning of the governmental leaders was at that point. And we'll probably break in and out a couple different times. But let's go, first of all, take a look here. And it would be number 7 there. Good. Yep.
Homeland Security, Intelligence, and Terrorism. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you, Steve.
As a way of setting up the discussion and the vote yesterday on the House floor, we want to share with you some of the sentiment from two members of Congress, Congressman David Obey and Congressman Buck McKeon, as they talked about our situation in Afghanistan and continued funding that ultimately was approved, $59 billion by the U.S. House.
Military experts tell us that it could take up to 10 more years to achieve any acceptable outcome in Afghanistan. We've already been there 9 years. I believe that is too high a price to pay. Now, to those who say we must pay it because we're going after al-Qaeda, I would note that Afghanistan is where al-Qaeda used to be. Today there are fewer than 100 al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, which was publicly confirmed last month by CIA Chief Panetta. Al-Qaeda has relocated to other countries and regions. I yield myself one additional minute. I have the highest respect and appreciation for our troops who have done everything asked of them. They're being asked, but they are being let down by the inability of the governments of Afghanistan and in some instances Pakistan to do their parts. I would be willing to support additional war funding provided that Congress would vote up or down explicitly on whether or not to continue this policy after a new national intelligence estimate is produced. But absent that discipline, I cannot look my constituents in the eye and say that this operation will hurt our enemies more than it hurts us.
Now, one of the interesting things, of course, is that Representative Obey there, he, of course, did not continue to